Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to our memorial service for our dear colleague, our friend, our wife, our mother, our aunt, our sister, Louise Halper, who we all miss very much. I am Joan Shaughnessy. I was a colleague of Louise's for the entire time that she was here at Washington and Lee, and I will be introducing you to the people who will be speaking today very briefly. We will begin with President Ken Ruscio.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome to everyone. Your presence here today is a testimony to the contributions Louise made not only to the university, not only to the School of Law, not only to the legal profession, but to each of us as individuals. I knew her well, maybe not as well as some of the others who will soon offer their tributes, but certainly well enough to remember her with respect, admiration, and affection. I have just a few comments, and then I'll step aside and allow the threads of the memories of many others to come together and reveal to us the tapestry of her very accomplished life. Here is one sentence I never had to say in Louise's presence. So, Louise, tell me what you really think. She was a woman of strong opinions, strongly held, and strongly argued. They were presented with clarity and precision, animated by conviction, principles, and values. I am not an attorney and have not had the privilege of attending a law school, but in my idealistic rendering of what it must be like in its best form, I imagine intellectual exchanges with someone like Louise. Intricate, carefully formed positions, adversarial discussions, not for the sake of confrontation, but for the sake of improving one's argument and reaching a higher level of understanding. Confidence in your own position, but a willingness to adjust based on the strength of an opposing position. An attention to detail woven into a tableau of justice, fairness, and equity. In my conversations with Louise, that was what I found. A sense of principle and a powerful intellect. And she had a versatile and curious mind. I first started working with Louise back in the mid-90s when I was a faculty member, and she graciously agreed to be the law school representative on our newly formed Environmental Studies Committee. She was our legal expert, the colleague who advanced our interdisciplinary discussions by opening our eyes to legal perspectives on the environment. But it is only with hindsight and my own better understanding of environmental policy that I've come to appreciate just how adept she was at calling upon her experience in environmental regulation, her knowledge of property law, her insight into history and sociology, and many, many other areas. We had a lunch group that met about once a month. Each of us took our turns presenting a topic on environmental policy or science. And I remember well, even to this day, Louise's discussion over pizza and Cokes of property and how she wove into that presentation an historical and legal analysis that to this day still informs my approach. And I can still recall the hard and challenging questions she would ask of others, the kind of hard and challenging questions that made our own work so much better. Then in later years, her work continued to broaden as she moved into the international arena, women's rights, and cultural differences. It was the versatility and the sharpness of her intellect that I will always remember, and her ability to bring all of us into conversations on topics that drew her own curiosity. When I returned to the university a couple of years ago, in this very different capacity, I attended a welcoming reception at the School of Law. And I remember so well the greeting and the good wishes that I received that day from Louise. In this new capacity, I knew full well that while we would undoubtedly remain friends, and we did, she would keep me on my toes, and she did. And that she was someone I needed to listen to, and I did listen, and very carefully. I will miss her wise and sharp counsel, and the university will miss her presence. The way she kept us honest, the values she espoused, and the intellect she brought to everything she did. We were privileged to have her as a colleague, and we are a better university because of her time with us.
Thank you, President Ruscio. Now ask Louise's beloved husband, friend, to come to the podium.
Thank you all so much for coming today. To avoid the trail of tears, I'll be brief and read quickly. Dear, dear Louise, we still don't know why you died, but you know that you wouldn't have stood for such ignorance, nor will we. Professor Louise A. Halper was thoroughly dedicated to Washington School of Law, its ranking, its reputation, its wonderful students, a place for scholarship, and also a university in which fairness, diversity, and treating all people fairly should thrive also. She met, taught, helped, influenced, and exchanged ideas with so many, both inside and outside the classroom, that it goes beyond the concept of merely having touched others. I received letters from neighbors who she befriended and helped, and must tell you that there's no shame in writing a poorly crafted note to express one's sorrow and acknowledge Louise's vibrancy and modesty that were known to people in the community. She was truly someone who cared about other human beings. I cannot describe to you the intensity with which Louise wanted to be here for the start of this semester. To live through a labor of her intellectual love in organizing and thinking about the year's programs sponsored by the Francis Lewis Law Center. She told me she'd get chemo, a little radiation, and be back just in time for the beginning of things. But she was cancer-free. Her favorite food had always been books. A very fast reader who could read in the dark, we thought. I recall her telling me not too long ago that although she felt that she was getting older, she said, "I still remember whatever I read." I, of course, couldn't say that. I'm sure you all benefited from her incredible breadth of knowledge, enthusiasm for sharing, most modestly, her ideas and worldliness. I love talking with Louise. Louise did many socially valuable things as a public interest lawyer before turning to the life of semesters. I brought with me her World Trade Center ID, which I'll show to anyone who'd like to see it. She worked on the 47th floor where the snow went up rather than down as an assistant attorney general in environmental protection. She did some amazing things in making possible the cleanup of a terribly harmful and polluted Love Canal as she began developing her ingenious concepts about questions of public nuisance. I wish I could have found a favorite picture of Louise's, of a padlocked chain link gate, the entrance to American Metals, a polluting smelter in New Jersey that New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia first attempted to shut down in the 30s. It took Louise to do it in the 80s. Here it was, her thinking, theorizing, and writing about air pollution across state lines. I enjoyed reading everything she wrote and published, including the endless footnotes. My favorite was her piece on Buchanan. She was always a principled person who held her views strongly, but wasn't judgmental. I won't discuss her political lawyering in freeing a framed Reuben Hurricane Carter, or fighting very early on Republican efforts at New Jersey black voter suppression, or Congressman Helstosky, but just to say that our lifestyle changed dramatically when she accepted the academic position at Washington and Lee. I tried to keep our son Reuben away from the Montclair police, while Louise reviewed homework assignments with him over the phone from Lexington. There were so many colleagues and friends who were wonderful to Louise, and during those early few years at Washington and Lee, Uncas and Ann, Gwen and John Handelman, Sean, of course, Mark and Sally, Lash and Sue. I'll never forget Sam Calhoun offering to babysit, and we went out and had a great night. She loved Randy Bezanson. I just realized the other day that in those 17 years of commuting every other week to New Jersey during the academic year from Virginia, Louise never got stranded at an airport or a layover city. She always made it home, and we hugged. I would visit Lexington once a year, sometimes twice, would purchase an out-of-state opening day fishing license, and would prowl the countryside in a rented car. Louise loved taking me around and introducing me to the many new people that she met and admired. I think she also loved dispelling any idea that she didn't have a husband, so I was the certified husband. One thing that Louise acquired down here was that around 5 o'clock she'd indicate that it was time for some scotch on the rocks with a dash of water. We were to have had our 42nd anniversary on September 4th, and I'll miss her forever.
Louise's son, Jacob Halper.
My name is Jacob Halper. I'm Louise's eldest son. You'll meet Reuben, my brother, a little later on. I just want to thank all of you guys for putting this together today. It's really been a treat for me to come down here and meet all of you and to see this other side of my mother's life. I've only been down here, I guess, twice before, and the last time was about 10 years ago. So I never even had the opportunity to see her new home, let alone meet many of the people that she'd spoken about so often. It's going to be a joy for me to listen to all of you today and just hear Louise's influence on everybody. My life has pretty much followed her career arc. You know, I was born her first year of law school, so there's still people that refer to me as law school baby. I still remember banging on typewriters at the ACLU in Newark, New Jersey, when she was working on prison rights. And staring out that window on the 47th and the library at the 79th floor at the Assistant Attorney General's office, and just feeling drifty while watching snow fall over Manhattan at the World Trade Center. I went to NYU when she decided to make that change from law or practicing law to academia, and it was basically her influence that did that. I was ready to go to Tulane, and she wanted to go back to school, so it was basically, you know, well, why don't you just check out NYU? We can go there for free, or you can go and take out loans at Tulane. So I went to NYU. A choice I'll never regret, and something that was just one of the ways she influenced me. It was my senior year of college when she started at WNL, and I'll never forget the decisions that she had to make. You're going where? What? Who? You know, I knew nothing about this place, and it seemed a million miles away from me. But as Fred pointed out, she made every effort to come back and see us as often as possible. She loved it here. I think that as much as she may sort of bitch and moan about the system and, you know, whatever difficulties she had here, she relished her role as a fighter for social justice, be it on the university level, on the community level, in terms of her influence with people here. I think that it allowed her an incredible platform. I mean, how many other people do you know that can actually go from practicing law to an academic career midway through their lives and be successful at it? WNL allowed her a platform and aegis in which to jump out there and see the world and just work, basically. You know, her travels to Cairo, to Istanbul, to Harvard. I mean, my God, whoever imagined it? So my only words to you would be to please keep her memory alive and keep fighting for the social justice issues. You know, I thought it was normal to sit there and talk about these things all the time, and I realized that that's not the case. And, you know, I miss her. Thank you.
Louise and my colleague, Tim Jobs from the law school.
I miss Louise Halper a lot. Louise was a great friend and a unique person. I miss a lot of things about Louise, but let me tell you some of the things I miss most. First, I miss conversations with Louise. One never talked about the weather with Louise. One talked about great Iranian films, great ideas, the state of the law school, and above all, politics. Louise held down the radical left end of the faculty with me, and I could count on her to go to anti-war marches in Washington, which is where I met Fred, and to discuss conspiracy theories that others might think a bit nutty. She cared passionately about the poor, about workers, about civil rights, about Palestinians as well as Israelis, and about oppressed people throughout the world. She was always an inspiration to me, and she was always a lot of fun to talk to. One of the things she cared deeply about was faculty governance. The story is told that when President Eisenhower was briefly president of Columbia University after the war, he congratulated a faculty member for being a distinguished employee of the university. The professor replied, "Mr. President, the faculty is the university." Louise believed this and believed that the faculty needs to take responsibility for the governance of the university and above all for our students. At a time when more and more university faculty are content to be employees or even independent contractors, she inspired me, and I think all of us, to take this responsibility to be the university seriously. But the thing that I admired most about Louise was her integrity. I could always count on getting a completely honest, unvarnished opinion from Louise on any topic, and I could always count on her to tell me when I was wrong about something. She would not just be polite, she would tell me that I was wrong. She wouldn't hold back, even though I hope that she has yet proven wrong in her belief that Hillary Clinton was the only electable Democrat this year. I treasured her honesty, her integrity. I sorely missed the opportunity to have her straighten me out. I know that her being here was a big sacrifice for her. She was away from her family so much of the time, and I know it was a big sacrifice for you, Fred, and Jacob, and Ruben. But we really appreciated you sharing her with us. So, thank you.
Louise also spent a great deal of time with faculty from the rest of the university, and we have with us anthropology professor Sasha Go.
Hi. Louise and I taught a class together in the fall of 2003, Gender, Law, and Culture, focusing on the Islamic world, and of course it was her idea to teach the class. I was doing some research in Azerbaijan on Jewish communities, and she was doing her research in Iran, and she said, "Hey, why don't we teach a course together?" I said, "Sure." And she was able to make it happen somehow to get permission from the law side, and we managed to teach. The courses were listed separately, we taught them together, talk about gender and everyday practices around the world, impact of the state, revealed law and customary law on individuals, families, and groups, and talking about issues like modernity, tradition, democracy, and development. And I found the experience of teaching with Louise to be very challenging, but also extremely rewarding. I just want to talk about some of the things that we did together. Issues, teaching styles. How do we prepare for a class? That was a big issue. She had it all in her head. She knew what she wanted to do, and she liked to go her own way with her own ideas. She had a real sense of self and commitment, as the other speakers had said. And I was the opposite. I had reams and reams of questions, everything written down, detailed questions about all the readings. And so she was really concept-oriented. For example, we did a unit on state and citizenship in Turkey, and I had prepared about 2 pages, single-spaced questions on all the different readings, and she had prepared 2 questions. What were the changes in women's status that the Kemalist revolution achieved? What was that program undertaken for the sake of women's own rights or to modernize the nation? That was it. And it was a real learning experience for me because I learned how to think about the bigger issues, how to go from the small details that I sometimes get mired in as an ethnographer to the larger so what questions. So So she taught me to see the bigger picture, and I took that with me to my other classes. Another issue we faced was how do we integrate law and undergraduates together? We had about roughly 10 each, and they weren't talking with one another. And so I had an idea of, well, let's break them into groups, mixed groups, and have them debate a point. She wasn't sure that was going to work. But we did it, and afterwards she said, you know, yeah, I think I like that idea. So she took that with her. How do we lead the class? Where do we sit? It was a seminar, and I sat on one side and she sat on the other. That was fine until we disagreed about something. And then we realized, you know, we should sit next to each other and scribble notes so we know how to do that. Yeah. And I also learned to be more aware of my assumptions about teaching styles and views of classroom authority. And the law students also challenged me a lot on that. They challenged my authority a lot more than undergrads did. But I think one of the things I'll take away from this class was her ability to communicate with students effectively, and her deep caring about students. We had one of the big issues that came out in the class was how to differentiate between Islam as written and Islam as practiced. And we had some Muslim students who didn't really see that distinction or didn't want to talk about it in that way. We struggled with that throughout the course. We showed a film called Divorce Iranian Style with one of her favorite scholars, Ziba Mir Husseini. And one Muslim student afterwards didn't like the depiction of the local ways in which Islam is practiced, and he said that Louise and I were Osama bin Laden's henchmen. And that was stressful for me. She didn't seem to be that upset about it. And I said, Louise, maybe you should talk to the student. And she did, and she emailed me, and I actually saved the email. And I had a good talk with X, and I think it will have positive consequences. He feels he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and sees how that may sometimes lead him to be a bit more defensive than he needs to be. And so she was able to draw him out. And she had a great way of reaching out to students, and I really appreciated that. And actually, from that conversation with him, he became more open about his religious beliefs and actually gave a guest lecture in the undergraduate side about American Muslims. The students really loved him. They loved his presentation, his passion. So she was able to cultivate students and mentor young professors like myself. Sorry. Teaching with Louise made me a better professor, and I wish I had told her that. So thank you very much.
History professor Ched Delaney is also with us this morning.
I want to share with you at the beginning 2 quotes from Martin Luther King. History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of bad people, but the appalling silence of good people. The second one, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. I never heard Louise cite either one of these quotes, but surely she lived them. My relationship with Louise began with a quest for justice on this campus. In the year of 2001, we were 2 members of the faculty task force, so was Sasha, who had as its charge finding a way to create a better atmosphere of tolerance between conservative white students and students of different racial, ethnic, and sexual minorities. During our shared tenure on this committee, I learned that Louise was neither silent nor passive. She was always direct and outspoken about social justice issues. I admired Louise's wit and enthusiasm about those social justice issues that often seemed unimportant in our hallowed halls. She was my friend, and I visited her office several times last year. I guess I gravitated to Louise because we were kindred spirits in many ways. She was often an inspiration because I am too often both passive and sometimes people like Louise need to remind me that silence is far too easy. Louise's death diminishes me. It diminishes all of us because of our deep love and great respect for her. It also diminishes our community because we have lost a strong and passionate voice, one that would always call each of us to accountability. Louise never worried about whether we would like what she had to say, and she was never guilty of that appalling silence that characterizes so many good people. I will sincerely miss Louise Halper.
With us today is Robin Hazlett, a friend of Louise's, who has asked me to read her remarks for her. Everyone here has fond memories of Louise. Please grant me a few minutes to describe one of my dearest friends. When I first met her, I was working at the law school and was told she needed help to maintain her residence in Lexington. I was nervous to approach her, having not met Louise before, but instantly her kind words and sincerity were overwhelming. Since that time, she has always made me feel appreciated and encouraged every ambition I voiced to her. Louise and I formed a very special bond over the past 13 years. She was always quick to send notes of thanks and love. One instance that sticks out in my mind is when Louise and Fred moved from their cabin into the existing residence. My husband, Scotty, and I surprised them by setting up the new home. The shock and appreciation were apparent on their faces. When you have friends as good as Louise was to me, you want to do things for them to make their lives easier. I knew she would be busy preparing for the new school year, and this was my way of trying to give back to her some of the kindness and love she always gave me. We cannot question why Louise was taken from us, but I know a piece of my heart went with her. Even though I never met her two sons, Louise constantly was sharing stories about them, to the extent that I felt that I had known them for years. Fred, I think of you as an extension of Louise, in that you have always treated me with respect and kindness. You are very dear to my heart. I would like to express my sympathy to Louise's family and offer my prayers that God can see them through the grief. I can seek some peace in the fact that Louise, as always, is guiding me with her love and concern. God must have needed another angel. Love, love. John Martin of the law class of 2008 has journeyed from afar to be with us.
Professor Halper, at least in the physical sense, is gone. This service will not bring her here to us. You will not find her in the words that I speak today. Yet she is with us here because of the parts of her that each of us carries up here and in here. So I will speak to you about Professor Halper as she remains in my head and in my heart, not to have you connect to or even listen to my experience of Professor Halper, but instead to urge each of you to find the part of her that is here with you now. And that way, hopefully, we will realize that she's not just here in our hearts or our heads, but rather that her spirit remains with ours. In my mind, Professor Halper is in classroom D. When Professor Halper started property class each afternoon, she always had a smile on her face. She had clearly thought up a new point of discussion that she believed would challenge her students to consider the material of the course in a new way. And the students were smiling too, because they had been in class for a few weeks, and they knew from the moment Professor Halper started smiling that an energetic and thought-provoking exchange was about to take place. Moreover, they had spent some serious time with the material, and they had had that eureka moment where they knew what the question was going to be and how they were going to respond to it. But the smiles only lasted for a few seconds because Professor Halper started the class with something that we hadn't thought of at all, and we realized we had been outmaneuvered again. So, behind the now composed, muted expressions, every mind in the room was scrambling to readjust to this unexpected discussion, and we were all hoping someone else would speak. That strategy, however, was of no avail, because Professor Halper was ravenous in her appetite for new ideas and new opinions, and she would call on as many faces as her eyes could find. And so, but once we got a chance to catch our breath, we were all smiling all over again, because each of us could tell from the way that she was willing to listen to us and to debate with us in earnest that she loved and respected her students. You see, in any institution, professors will preach the virtues of seeing their students as peers and as colleagues. Good professors believe in this ideal, but great professors live it, as did Professor Halper. In my heart, there is Professor Halper, the frank, stalwart advisor who was always in my corner when I was the head of Outlaw. Sometimes I would approach her about issues relating to the organization's mission or to its agenda for the year. Going to that big office in the Powell Suite, I always felt I had a great plan or a great idea, and I always came out realizing that I had a lot of work to do. Whenever I presented an idea to Professor Halper, I'd write it down on a piece of scrap paper or maybe type it out if I had time. And that way I always felt prepared. I figured, after all, that if I had taken the time to think it out enough to write it down on paper, then surely it would be good enough to meet Professor Halper's approval. So I typically got about 2 minutes through my description of my plan before Professor Halper said anything. It always began with a question. First question I usually had a pretty good response for. I could even get through the second one. But for pretty much every question or comment after that, it was a steady decline as I was trying to cobble something together to stave off the compounding flaws that Professor Halper could point out in my plans. You see, like the best advisors, Professor Halper told you what you needed to hear and not what you wanted to hear. And mind you, I always felt I was right, and I was sure each time that I was going to win that debate, but it never happened. And I really wish that she was in that office now so that I could get just one more chance to maybe win one of those arguments, but it would probably come out the same way. So I'd sit there feeling a little bit defeated, and Professor Halper would end the conversation by saying, "Well, sounds like a promising idea. Come back and talk to me again tomorrow." And thanks to her, I would come back the next day, and it was a better idea for it. And her guidance really helped the organization succeed. It was just one of the ways that she touched our hearts. In fact, Professor Halper touched the heart of every student she met. She took advantage of opportunities to interact with students outside of the classroom, whether in the hallways or at a dean's cocktail or at a reception after one of the symposiums. It was just one of the many ways she strengthened the bonds of our community. For example, every year our organization would hold a barbecue, and Professor Halper always came. And at last year's event, all of our friends and allies were gathered. We were having great conversation, good food. And Professor Halper, as she always did, made sure to speak with all the new students, not just familiar faces. And she spoke to us with great enthusiasm about the symposium she was planning for that spring. And the sky grew dim and the stars came out. In that moment, I saw all the things that make this place great. Beautiful surroundings, great minds, and because Professor Halper was there, great people. And finally, I want you all to know that Professor Halper's spirit lives on with her family, her friends, her students, and with every new student who enters this community of learning, experiencing the great improvements she made to this place. Professor Halper's students are now spread across the country and across the globe, devoting their hearts and minds to their community, just as Professor Halper gave so much of herself to this community. Professor Halper continues to give too, for I promise you that in the next world she retains her same passion and energy, provoking new conversations and making new friends.
Erica Knott is a member of the class of 2009, and she is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Civil Rights and Social Justice.
Good morning. 14 years ago, Professor Halper and 6 students formed the Race and Ethnic Ancestry Law Journal at Washington and Lee. Today, that journal continues to exist as the Journal of Civil Rights and Social Justice. I am honored to speak to you today on behalf of the journal and in memory of Professor Halper. Professor Halper understood the necessity and power of diversity. She was relentless in her goal to make Washington and Lee a welcoming place for all students. In her eyes, the journal was a vital part of this goal. With the news of her passing, the journal experienced outpours of emotion from our alumni. I would like to share with you one of their remarks today. Journal alumnus Phyllis Mitchell writes, "I knew Louise as a peer, an advocate, a mentor, and most of all, a very dear friend. I was introduced to her extraordinary mentoring skills in 2000. An incident occurred on the undergraduate campus when I was a 2L involving a sensitive racial issue. As a member of the journal, I spent significant time in Louise's office and on the undergraduate campus trying to decipher the rationale for the incident. Louise said to me, 'This was deplorable, but we're going to get something out of this.' And we did. We got sincere, heartfelt apologies from the students and a new interest from the administration to take steps to ensure parity for students of color. We had made a true and lasting difference. I was a non-traditional student, and Louise was a friend guiding me through the perils of my academic career." Phyllis concluded by saying, "You meet people in life whom you savor and want to save and hang on to. Louise was one of those people. I can only hope to be like her when I grow up." The journal chose to share this comment because it reflects the relationship Professor Halper had with us. As part of the journal, if we could dream it, Professor Halper sought to make it a reality. If we saw wrong, she helped us to right it. She taught us that we were more than an academic journal. We felt important to the school. We were a force, and together we could make a difference. I admit that we as an organization feel lost without her. When the news of her passing reached me over the summer, I was devastated. I thought there was no one like Professor Halper. As a student, I feel the loss of one of the school's greatest mentors. As a member of the journal, I feel like we've lost our greatest advocate and friend. The journal has never existed without her guidance. As we step forward without her, we can only hope to live up to the vision that she created for us. Thank you.
Louise was a wonderful mentor to many students. From Turkey, Asli Erdogan writes, "Louise was my host mother when I was an exchange student at Washington and Lee. She went beyond being my host mother, and I really feel like I lost my mom when she died." She was the most impressive woman on earth for me, and her loss is something very profound. David Jordan, who was in the law class of 2003, is now a colleague here at the law school.
I'm one of the few people here that had the opportunity to know Louise as both a student and a colleague, and I wanted to share a couple of experiences that I had with her, the things that I remember most when I think of her. First is how she changed my life in a very, very real and particular way. I remember sitting, I was doing fellowship at NYU Law School, working on private military companies and trying to figure out the path into academia, which is very, very difficult. And all of a sudden I received a phone call on my cell phone. It was Louise, and she was calling with a potential opportunity to work at WNL as a visiting assistant professor of law. And everything changed right at that point. I was immediately excited, not only because of the opportunity, but also because of the opportunity to get a chance to work with somebody like Louise. I had her as a professor for property, and I just remembered the excellence that she brought into the classroom. In particular, one experience, another professor who's actually in the room right now, I'm not going to mention who it is, was teaching a very difficult business course, and was going through the room asking a question pertinent to property issues. Nobody knew where he was going. Nobody could answer the question. And I remember, with all confidence, raising my hand, answering the question with complete proficiency. And his remark to me was, "I know who you had for property person." And just the type of excellence. And remembering studying for the bar, remembering how little preparation I had to do to prepare for the property section, which is typically the most onerous part of the bar exam. It just brought me back to the excellence that Louise brought into the classroom and the complete thoroughness with which she helped to prepare us for our later lives as attorneys. Another sad thing for me personally is every time I look, I've got this. My first big work is a 400-page magnum opus. This book that I've been preparing. And every time I open it up, on the first page, I have this dedication to Louise Halper, that has been there since I found out I was going to be coming back to Washington and Lee, because I always had expected her to be the first reader and one of the first people to go back and forth and spar on some of the jurisprudential concepts and some of the deeper philosophical issues that I tried to address in the book. I had always just expected that she would be there and that she would be the person to whom I would go first with all these questions to try to hone this very difficult work that I'm trying to do. And it makes me sad to know that she's not going to be around, not down in the Powell Suite to help me out with that. I had always just assumed that she would be integral. I had even, I'd already put her in the acknowledgments. But what I've tried to do in order to pay tribute to her memories and her career in the law is to pattern my own career as a law professor after Louise's career. I try to be never too busy to step in to help change the life of a student for the better. Every chance I get, I try to go and help out. At least I can't do it as much as she. Anybody who knew her well knew that is what typified and characterized her entire career. And one way that I'm working right now with the students on the Journal of Civil Rights and Social Justice to put together a tribute, a collected works volume that's going to pay tribute to her career in legal scholarship, and it's going to bring together all of the collected works that she had spent her lifetime contributing to the world of ideas. And hopefully that will be one way that we can keep her memory alive here at the law school. Thank you.
Corky Miller is one of Louise's dearest friends from this part of the world. Corky.
When I came to New York for Louise's memorial service. It was different. I was going to NYU. I had to take the subway. I didn't know where I was going. I had a lot of other things, and I was overwhelmed, but not the way I feel today. This is the first time I've been back to law school since Louise died, and it's pretty hard to be here. I'm moved by what everybody has said. She was just a phenomenal person. She was a phenomenal friend. I didn't know her as a student. I worked in the law library for a while. I met her at a Rosh Hashanah meal at a community person's house, and we had Western Massachusetts in common. I had lived there for 14 years, so the thing that I miss the most, and Felissa Mitchell is part of this too, but the three of us would get together and we would drink and we would smoke cigarettes. And we mostly didn't argue about political things because we all pretty much agreed. But we would talk about people everywhere. And she was just so full and had so much life in her, and it just seems so unfair to me that she isn't here. And I feel like this is great, seeing everybody that she loved and knew and everything, and I feel like there's something missing. Louise should be here. You know, and my heart goes out to the three of you, because as painful as it is for me, I'm sure it's just everything to you.
Our colleague Scott Sunby is at the University of Miami Law School this semester, and he writes, "From the moment the whirlwind known as Louise Halper hit Lexington, she immediately became one of my best friends. When I think back to our many wonderful conversations, we were never able to quite solve the world's problems, despite our best efforts. Louise was able, though, to make each day pass for me with a bit more joy in it. And isn't that what we really need from our family and friends? I never tired of her telling me about Fred's latest insight into the political scene, guaranteed to always bring a smile to my face with his wit, or of hearing how proud she was of her son's accomplishments. When I really think about it, what made Louise such a special person was that she had a wonderful way of making you feel like you were a co-conspirator with her in trying to figure out the vast mystery and intrigue of life. And the greatest thing about being her co-conspirator was that she never let her remarkably clear-eyed view of the world take away her optimism. If I felt particularly bleak, I knew I could always trot down to Louise's office and emerge feeling re-energized to take on the world. And here is Louise's greatest gift to me. She made me realize what it means to believe in the good and the just, and to never give up, because there is always another turn in the road ahead which holds the promise of better times. Thank you, Louise, for that lesson. I will never forget you." Uncas McDeany was not a student of Louise's, but a colleague. However, he is a law class of 1963.
Problem is, Sean, if you know Louise, you're always her student. Louise Halper was the queen of brass, and I'm honored to be here and to talk about her today. And I know that I love Louise in a kind of a special sort of way and had a great respect for her mind. But I also know that if Louise were here, she'd call a timeout for just a second on these proceedings until we could exorcise this room of any saccharine sweetness. And I guess I'll try to help her clear that air. So I will say that her life, her brassiness, her smile, her cutting sense of humor, her sense of outrage and pretense with BS, her in-your-face and confrontational honesty, and yes, her caring and deep tenderness demand the truth. I asked Louise's assistant, Wendy Rice, to help me dig up some of the stuff she had been working on recently, and she was a wonderful help in that regard. Louise's writing has a freshness that's all too rare in this world. I want to talk just a moment about some of her recent work. Some years ago, she took off for Turkey to investigate the condition of women in Turkey, and I was watching a video the other day of her talking to a group at MIT about that. And it's her incredible honesty. So this is Louise's voice. I'm making this argument that women are better off in secular situations. And what I found out in Turkey was interesting to me. It was that, in fact, the situation of women in Turkey was almost parallel to the situation of women in Iran. It really obviously shot holes in what I was doing, and I had to rethink things, and that made me wonder. Well, the next thing I knew is I got a postcard from her in Iran, and I wondered if she'd lost her way home on the way back from Turkey. But what she did was pretty amazing. She went to Iran and began to look around and to talk to folks and ask questions and do a lot of interesting research, and she came up with a powerful conclusion. She found that in large-scale social measures, these are her words again, measured in large-scale social measures of women's progress in literacy, education, labor force participation, political participation, reproductive control, the situation of women in Iran has improved remarkably since 1980. To read the paper in which she discusses this conclusion is interesting. It's an interesting intellectual enterprise. But to go to the MIT website and watch her outline on this film, or the DVD, she discusses her thesis with the Iran study group as pure joy. She knew she was confronting a lot of conventional wisdom, and her diplomatic way of telling the truth about what she learned is quite amazing. She's aware that she's swimming upstream against a lot of feminine voices, but in a gentle way she acknowledges that and says, this is something that the situation of women in Iran has been written about a lot in English. My feeling is often from, what should I call it, a position in which the empathetic writers identify with, not generally with women in Iran, but with women in Iran in particular, various kinds of social locations, so that one hears a good deal about the situation of women like the writer. Often that's upper class, educated woman who herself or her family before the revolution were in a fairly good situation as well. For many of these women, the revolution did not, in fact, improve their condition. In fact, for many of those women, their situations became worse. Well, that was Louise's way of telling the truth. And since I've retired, I've seen less of her than I would have liked. But I did see her smile a lot in the last academic year as she reveled in the work of the Law Center. Sometimes she seemed to forget who she was. A brassy, no-nonsense New Jersey lawyer turned academic, and actually acted like a kid in a candy store. I remember one day last fall, I was riding my bike on the way to the river, and here she comes rolling by in this old wreck of a car of hers and pulled over and began to tell me how excited she was to be going to the airport to pick up some famous speaker. Wow, she said, I get to spend a whole hour with, and we won't mention speaker. It was the same excitement I used to experience when I was a kid and the Boston Braves, then Boston Braves, used to come through West Virginia for an exhibition game on the field in Bluefield. To get a ticket to a spring training exhibition game in made a cold Appalachian April day seem like the 4th of July. Well, that's the kind of joy that's generally off limits for people who are older than 12 years of age. But off limits was neither a place nor a concept that Louise would recognize. And there's a good reason for that. If she were to acknowledge off limits, she would have had to grow up. And if she'd done that, she would have lost the love of her life, Fred. A gentle soul who so adamantly and beautifully declines to become sophisticated in the ways that the world expects people do when they grow up. Fred, who would just as soon have been a Manhattan taxi driver as the accomplished academic psychologist that he is, has lost an incredible soulmate. Fred, I can only imagine the pain and the loss that you and Jake and Reuben have experienced. And I can't begin to put words around it all. But I know that whenever the time comes for your grief to turn to the bittersweet pain of mourning, that among those memories will be that wonderful woman who could pull a rug out from under you with such skill that you didn't know you'd fall on your ass until she rounded the corner laughing. And I have, on numerous occasions, found myself on the floor more than once. On one of those occasions when I was back in the law school, I always revert to my old habit of whistling. In the halls, I had a coffee pot or something. And sometimes in the last year or so, Louise passed me in the hall with an armload of books, and she looked back and said, "There's Uncas, still whistling." And she went down the hall and gave it one last shot, and retirement hasn't helped at all. And whenever I whistle, Fred, I think of you and Louise taking Ann and me all over Manhattan and the Bronx in that old car of yours, and stopping for Polish food, and you telling me that the bad thing about Polish food, it only sticks with you for 2 or 3 days. And the taxi cab hitting your car on 57th Street, and the driver getting out to try to bribe you not to go to the police. And you're telling him to keep his $20 because that was about half the worth of the car anyhow. And hearing you tell stories of your youth on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, and Louise shaking her head and smiling. Thank you for your friendship and for sharing the love of your life with us. We are the richer for it.
Next, I'll call upon our Dean, Rod Smola.
On Monday, the Faculty of Law passed a resolution to present to Fred and to Jake and to Reuben. It is a resolution that shares our reflections and admiration for the life that Louise lived, for the time that she shared with us, for her contributions to the profession, and her contributions to society. I'd like to present to the three of you on behalf of all of us in Washington. I invite you to listen to the lines of Psalm 137, which is the psalm of the mourning of the exiles at Babylon. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, there we wept. When we remembered Zion, we hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Babylon. The songs of Louise's life, as we have heard, were songs of human dignity, songs of diversity, songs of liberty and of justice. And in a few moments, after we hear from Reuben, we'll stand together and sing one of those songs. And like the mourners on the banks of the rivers of Babylon, we'll sing it with reflection and bittersweet memory.
Louise's son, Reuben Halper.
So I'd like to just start by following up on my dad's earlier comment that they were unsuccessful in extricating me from the police and my lifelong love affair with the criminal justice system. So if anybody knows a good defense attorney, please come after the memorial and give me a shout. So I just want to, thank everybody. It's been a tremendous loss for us over the past few months, and it's going to continue to be that way. But in my mom's death, I think that I've actually learned more about her and learned about the breadth of her influence and the spectrum of people that she touched. And that's come through emails, that's come through calls, that's come through everybody speaking here. And it's incredible because you see your mom as somebody who's focused on you. And to understand all that she gave to so many people and how she still had the time to do that and really make everybody feel that they were getting 100% of her just absolutely blows my mind. Her influence was far-ranging, whether it be students, colleagues, the neighbor's daughter that she helped with homework. I can only hope that daughter didn't get the same red pen that I got when she was helping with the homework. It looked like somebody bled all over my papers. But my mom really taught me a love of learning, and she was an incredible intellect. I've taken that through my life, and I kind of live life with the motto that often in error, never in doubt. And unfortunately, she imparted the skills in terms of arguing on me, but not really the depth of learning, so that I am in doubt. Where her motto would more be never in error, never in doubt. So it's in the past few months, I feel like there's a huge void in terms of that learning, whether it be on the phone, through email, everything that's been going on, both politically, economically. I know that she would have a tremendous amount of material that she had already filtered down 90% of it and was passing on 10% of it, and yet that would still account for 30 emails a day. And just getting through that, and I honestly feel dumber now that she's not with us. I'm not getting that same breadth of perspective. I'm not getting that same exposure to different viewpoints. And as a result, I'm just not as intellectually rounded, with her no longer passing along the tremendous amount of knowledge that she had already incorporated, and then through discussion just opening my eyes to what I may be missing in my own viewpoints. Our family dinners were often something that started out at a low volume and would end up at a very high volume with my brother and myself taking what would be a right position, which in sort of the societal spectrum would be over down here on the left. But in our family, it was sort of a right or a center position. But from all those conversations and from all those, stimulating sort of political and economic discussions, it's always something where my viewpoint came away richer, even if I disagreed. And it seems like that's something that my mother imparted on everybody that she touched and everybody that she interacted with. So it's really, again, just been eye-opening to me to see the amount of influence and the breadth of that influence. So thank you again for sharing everything and your experiences with her. It's given me a full circle picture of my mother's life, and I know it's been something that has helped provide comfort to us in these past few months, and will continue to provide comfort as we deal with her loss. So thank you.
The staff of the law school was devoted to this place and was devoted to Louise, and I wanted to acknowledge the help of many of the staff in putting today's program together, particularly Wendy Rice, Louise's assistant and friend, Diane Cochran, Florentina Butler, Peter Chitone, and Mary Woodson. And now I'd like to call to the podium to lead us in song my former colleague and the current dean of Wake Forest Law School, Blake Morant, together with Stephanie Shaman.
Louise always wanted me to sing here in the law school. I thought that academic pursuits were the only thing I should do in the place, but when I was asked to do this, I thought about it long and hard, and I decided this would be a wonderful dedication to her and her legacy. I want to thank my partner in song, Stephanie Shane, a wonderful soprano with whom I duet with a lot when I was in Lexington. We will continue to do so. What we're going to do is Stephanie and I will sing the first verse, and then after that we'll signal you to then sing the first verse, the second verse, the third, and then repeat the first. So, and then at the end of that, Stephanie and I will end the entire song with our own a cappella selection. So, if you would, please stand.
We shall overcome.
We shall overcome.
We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
everyone.
Yes.